And it's not because Zane was killed. And Zane was killed for the lack of 4 words. You are in danger. Those 4 words could have saved Zane. This video shows you what happened. If I could ask panelists to stay muted, and then we will come back and we will hear speakers after the video. Thank you.
Good evening. Now it's the turn of the northwest of England to feel the full force of the storms battering Britain. The Met Office has issued a red alert, meaning a danger to life, as rain and hurricane force winds are lashing the northwest coast tonight. It's playing havoc with transport links, with the M6 closed, cruise station evacuated, some rail lines suspended.
Well, now back to the flooding, and all the evidence, says the Met Office, points to climate change. Their latest research has been tracking the changing patterns which have led to these unprecedented storms. Our weather presenter, Liam Dutton, what's going on then?
Well, it's astonishing, John, the weather we've seen over the past 2 months. Storm after storm slamming into our shores. And of course, yesterday, the Met Office said that all the evidence points to climate change playing a huge role in this. And
First time they've said that.
It is, and it could just be the case that we see more and more of this as we head into the future.
Tonight on BBC London News, could this 7-year-old have died as a result of poisoning during the winter floods? His family claim their search for answers is being blocked.
It's been more than 4 months since the floodwaters receded here, and yet the sandbags, the pumps are evidence of how this is a home caught in a single moment in time, the night Zane died. The family believe that on that night, contaminated floodwater from a former landfill site filled their basement. As theirs was the only one open to the soil, their theory is that poisonous vapour then infused the house. Kai lost consciousness and awoke in intensive care, only to be told his son had died. So far, no post-mortem has been able to ascertain his death, but his father says he and his son suffered from hydrogen cyanide poisoning. When these concerns were put to Surrey County Council, they denied the site at the rear of the property had ever been used as a landfill, saying, think carefully about spreading panic among local residents. In an official statement, they went on to say, Abbeyfield is a landscape lake area created as a result of mineral excavation and has not been a landfill site. Now it's emerged that a simple property search carried out by any home buyer will reveal the area is recorded as landfill. This is the property. At the rear, shaded brown, a local authority recorded landfill site. What's more, the report says there is the potential for significant ground contamination to exist. No site visit was made, but this is all based on information from Surrey County Council. And here's a similar search on the Environment Agency's website. The pink shows historic landfill, again, right next to their home. So what do the council have to say now? In a statement, they said simply, police are investigating this sad case and are waiting on the results of tests, so it wouldn't be appropriate to speculate on the cause of death until they have them.
No words can describe the heartache. No words of comfort anyone can say. I've never felt a pain like this before. A piece of my heart died with you. But I guess heaven needed you more. But I can't understand exactly what for. Is this a trial of my faith? A lesson to be learned? Why did my baby come and then so quickly return? I gotta get up off the floor and trust that heaven needed you more.
I am proud to say that I am Zane's mummy, and what I am going to say has not changed in the 80 months since my precious son was killed at the tender age of 7. It's been 7 years of hell learning to fight whilst grieving, fighting the authorities whose negligence killed our child, and it shocks me to the core. It's corruption in covering Zane's death up. You may have heard what I am going to tell you before, but I am going to say it over and over and over again until somebody listens, until the truth is investigated and admitted, and until lessons are learned and future deaths are prevented. The authorities own the property next door, and they had recordings of lethal gases and protected themselves with gas-proof membranes, whilst my child's lungs filled with toxic hydrogen cyanide, detected by hazmat and covered up by dark forces in the government. The council, the Environment Agency staff, all panicking to protect themselves, trying to absolve themselves from Zane's killing, hiding behind plausible deniability and hiding the truth. Police trying to blackmail a grieving mother to sign pre-written statements saying it's carbon monoxide, or they wouldn't release Zane's body for burial. Zane was finally laid to rest in April, 12 weeks after his death, and I sat and I held my son's hand every day for those 12 weeks. The authorities, the police and the coroner told the world that hydrogen cyanide were fanciful rants of parents in denial, parents so desperate to remove responsibility for killing their own child, they would say anything. And yet here we are today. It's public knowledge that hazmat detected very high levels of hydrogen cyanide and found no carbon monoxide or a petrol pump being used. We are delighted to have the Fire Brigade Union hosting today, standing in support of the truth about Zane. The coroner changed the day my son died. My son, who died in my arms on the 8th of February, and I held him until his little fingers froze around mine. I say this not to upset you, but to impress upon you that I witnessed every stage of my son's death, and yet the coroner, in his flawed inquest, stated on the balance of probability, Zane died from carbon monoxide intoxication on the 7th of February. Kai was 2 yards from Zane. His diagnosis, paraplegia from hydrogen cyanide poisoning. Now, I have only scratched the surface of what has happened to us, and by now I hope that you are all shocked to the core too. I am sure many in authority wish us to be broken and dysfunctional. God knows they have tried, but it's not until you are completely broken, you have faced your greatest fear, that you find your true strength. The power of love is stronger than the love of power, and no child was ever loved more than Zane. He knew every day how loved he was, and we dedicated our lives to him from the moment he was born, building our world around him, for he was our world. And we will fight for the rest of our life if we have to. Zane died and the authorities lied. Hillsborough shed the scales from many people's eyes when 96 deaths were covered up. With all these tragedies, there's a number. Grenfell, 72, Birmingham pub bombings, 21. And then there is little Zane, a number 1. To the world, he is one little boy, but to us, he is the world. How many more number 1s are there fighting for justice, fighting the authorities? How many sons and daughters have been killed? How many other families are there out there, not pointing the finger of blame, just asking for the truth? Fighting the systematic failures and cover-ups for truth recovery, corporate responsibility and institutional accountability. Fighting against wrong verdicts from coroners who examine the deaths of innocent victims through distorted lenses. Fighting authorities who spend public money like water in order to kick what happened into the long grass. Having to find tens of thousands of pounds to be represented at an inquest where there is no quality of arms, against numerous government bodies spending public money to protect reputations rather than to do the right thing. How long must this go on? It needs to stop here, and it needs to stop today. We must have transparency, accountability and jail for anyone in authority who lie and cover up deaths, protecting reputations, and we must have equal funding for equality of arms so authorities can't spend public money, leaving families like us to beg, borrow and crowdfund for legal representation at inquests. How many times will people close their eyes and their ears to the cries of grieving parents, numb to the exhausting abuses that they see every day? I believe that those that took part in dehumanising people and their rights can be instrumental in their restoration, in righting wrongs that are staring them in the face. It was always much better if we worked together. And despite our deep frustration over the past 18 months, we have harboured a hope that the authorities would change and they would start to do the right thing. Zane would have been 14 today. Added to our deep grief, we feel the constant pain of the inconsistencies and cruel disposition that is imposed upon us. And I emphasise that we will never win. Zane will never win. He has been taken from us, but we can expose the truth and we can protect others. We can give Zane the right to an honest and correct accounting of of the way in which he died and undo the injustice that dishonours him. There must be a full and fearless investigation from an independent panel inquiry with powers to compel disclosure into Zane's death. It has been almost 7 years since Zane's passing, and he was only 7 years old when he died. This has simply taken too long. We will continue to hold Zane's events. We will continue to ask you to rise up and to make sure that what happened to Zane never happens again. Hydrogen cyanide should not be in our neighbourhoods. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you all. Thank you for supporting. Thank you for speaking. But please help to keep Zane's voice heard. This is not over. And finally, I want to thank my husband, Kai, as we share each tear and endure every test side by side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cole. That's great. I'm back. I'm Kai. I'm Zane's daddy. A drink to Zane, of course, on Zane's birthday. You see, children should not die and the truth behind their death be covered up due to political decisions. A child's death is not political. I know that many of you have children of your own, so you will understand why so much saddens me about what happened to my innocent, loving, kind little boy, dying in a house infused with the deadly, invisible nerve agent hydrogen cyanide detected by our expert fire services hazmat. Paramount today is to remember Zane's 14th birthday. Brave, loyal and true. That's what Zane was. Zane would say how much he loved God, brave and true. At his last Taekwondo grading, there were not enough belts to go around, and belts are the award for a successful grading. As a black belt leader, as a group of them were called, Zane asked if the little girl next to him could have the belt he was handed, knowing how much it meant to her, while he offered to wait. Zane was loyal. The girl got the belt and Zane received his posthumously. I must remind everyone here that it was 6 weeks ago when a unanimous vote by Conservative-led Spelthorne Borough Council agreed to do the right thing. They approved a motion to tell the truth about a nigh on 7-year cover-up of a child's death. In their words, it was the landfill that killed Zane. Spelthorne now demand their Conservative government authorise an immediate independent panel inquiry for Zane, as they surely would had this have happened to their loved ones. You can see the motion on Spelthorne Borough Council's own YouTube channel. You will often read in the press, the family claim hydrogen cyanide killed their son. The family claim, no, no, no. It is the evidence that says that it was hydrogen cyanide. There was no carbon monoxide detected, only high levels of hydrogen cyanide, and a person cannot die from a substance that simply wasn't there. From day one, a government spokesman reported it was carbon monoxide that's to blame. This was despite so much, such evidence never even existing. The spokesman went on to say the family were using petrol pumps and generators, and these pumps were used to clear water from their flood basement. That was entirely false. There were no generators. The single 100 decibel petrol pump, which is the sound of a jet engine, was defective and could not run. And that was stated by the pump expert. The silent pumps witnessed were electric, run off an all-electric house. They cannot generate carbon monoxide, and neither do electric houses. At once, you can see, and it explains why there was no carbon monoxide detected. A demonstrably false position has been fabricated by authorities to stop the public joining the dots. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are people that have worked hard to cover up the truth. They behaved cruelly to deny Zane simply because they could. Some even offer condolences. You see, if you stick a knife 9 inches into my back and pull it out 3 inches, really, that's not progress. Our beautiful boy has been taken. The knife can never be removed. We just want the twisting of it to stop so that we can move forward in truth. Truth through the restoration of Zane's human rights to a proper, full and fearless investigation through an independent panel inquiry that compels full disclosure. This is our human obligation to Zane. Nothing here is radical. Truth for a child. To those who lead our justice system, all we have ever asked of you is to do your job. You should know that the brave women and men of the fire service that detected the very high levels of hydrogen cyanide, a chemical weapon of mass destruction in Zane's home, told the truth from the outset. Public authorities were forewarned in specialist geotechnical reports that there was secret landfill emitting toxic gases. The risk was high, and the consequences are serious injury and death. The authorities had this report that people would be killed 4 years before Zane died. The authorities' chosen response was to position gas-proof barriers to protect only their property and keep the problem a secret. The question surely arises, what about the law and the duty of those authorities to have informed us and take reasonable steps to prevent the gas from getting to us and also their other neighbours? And then that sickening question arises. Who leaves children and other human beings exposed to the risk of death, having protected themselves? Zane's home, independently tested months later, still had toxic landfill gases entering. Right now, national banks and mortgage lenders are valuing property at zero due to their proximity to landfill, reference BBC's Rip-Off Britain, and the dangers that it poses to people. We lived and literally died this and have always provided solutions to government. It's time to listen. This problem is not going to go away. In fact, it's getting worse, and it's time to act. The inquest did not investigate. It turned no stones and even denied Zane a jury. Zane was systematically stripped of his human rights to a proper, full and fearless investigation by an inquest stripping a child of its human rights. What kind of a country do we live in when cases like Zane's can't get a fair hearing? We were even denied legal aid for representation, whilst a phalanx of authorities had legal aid money for years, as did the coroner, who had a special additional QC and legal team. Spelthorne Council said, no one would deny a child justice unless they have something serious to hide. We know from records Zane's death went to emergency Cobra meetings the day that Zane died because of the very high, that's a quote, very high levels of hydrogen cyanide found in Zane's home and in the area, which had to be evacuated for weeks, many people decontaminated, 15 treated in hospital, Porton Down were called, all just as we saw with the Salisbury poisonings. It should never be the case, that the role of emergency Cobra meetings is to sweep the death of 7-year-old children under the carpet. Then attack, isolate, and abandon those that request independent oversight to stop the march of unaccountable power. No steps were taken to protect us from known dangers like Alexei Navalny and Dawn Sturges. We were simply innocent people poisoned by chemical weapons, but like them, Zane deserves the truth. Beautiful memories get scarred by the abuse and struggle that we have been forced to endure. We had the tears of not having Zane with us, condemned not to have the joy that he brought. We still tell Zane, we love you many times a day. We remember great times and great achievements already building up in Zane's young life, from a black belt leader to an environmental inspiration, and many things in between, including being this country's youngest science, technology, engineering and maths ambassador. A true thing I can say about Zane is that he was an extraordinary little human. When Zane was 6, he was interviewed, and in that interview, he said, sustainability and being green is not just about tidying up your own garden, it's about tidying an even bigger garden that belongs to everyone. I really want you to hear Zane's own words, to know the kindness, care, and compassion that Zane had for everyone. He helped to change not only the lexicon, but the focus of his school, who have gone on to inspire many, both young and old, in the ways of environment and sustainability. I emphasize what Nicole said. We will never win. Zane will never win. He's been taken from us, but we can expose the truth and protect others. Whatever anyone thinks, Zane deserves a proper, full and fearless investigation by independent panel inquiry with full powers to compel disclosure. Nobody wants to think their children are not safe when they have tucked them into bed at night. To Zane, I miss your warm hugs, I miss your kisses, I miss your smile, and I always will. To all here, peace and love to you and to your children, no matter how small or tall they are. Thank you. As we continue to advance for truth and remembrance, it is my great pleasure to bring forward a powerful voice for Zane, Mr. Matt Rack, General Secretary of the Fire Brigade. Welcome in, Mr. Matt Rack.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to be able to speak here tonight. I'm Matt Rack, I'm the General Secretary of the Fire Brigade Union. We represent firefighters and emergency control staff across the UK, including some of those who responded and dealt with this particular incident in Surrey. And I bring the greetings and solidarity of our union and our members to Zane's parents, to family and friends, and to the entire community. The job that our members do brings them into contact with tragedies and very difficult and challenging circumstances. And this indeed was one of those. It's a humanitarian job. The job of the firefighter, the job of the fire and rescue service is to save lives, to keep people safe, and to render humanitarian services. And it's that humanitarianism that also guides our union, and it colours what sort of union we are, and why we don't just look after ourselves and our own paying conditions and safety, but we have a wider view of society and what sort of society we want to see. And that's why we involve ourselves in campaigns like Zane's for justice. As has been said, members of our union were involved closely in this incident. Members of our union are the people who take emergency calls, sometimes in appalling circumstances. They respond to fires and other emergencies. And as we've already heard, they also engage in much wider activities, such as investigating what's happened at a fire or other tragedy. And it's that approach that has led us to be involved in this campaign from the early stages. And I want to thank in particular Lee Belston, who was at the time the Surrey Brigade Secretary for the Fire Brigade Union, and Joe Weir, our Regional Secretary in the South East. And at our 2019 conference, a resolution was brought to our conference raising the issue of the Justice for Zane campaign, and that was supported unanimously by our conference. And we've tried to do what we can to support Zane's parents and the campaign before and ever since that discussion at our conference. Because for us, it's not enough just to try and do our job. We want to ensure that tragedies like this do not happen. And when they do, people have the right to know the truth. People have the right to justice. And we have a long tradition of involving ourselves in campaigns for justice. And some of those have been mentioned tonight: Hillsborough, Grenfell, and others. So we're very pleased as a trade union representing firefighters, to be fully involved in doing what we can to support the campaign. We're very pleased to have worked, for example, with Richard Bergen and others in the Labour Party to raise this issue through Labour Party structures, and to do what we can through the trade union movement, politically, and in any other way that we can. And I pledge for the future that as long as our support is needed, then we hope to be there to provide that support and solidarity. Thank you very much for inviting us to speak, and our solidarity and support with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matt Rack. And our next speaker is Sir Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party, who has helped us as a powerful advocate in pressing for truth, and perhaps the main voice here that can get Zane's case under the nose of government. Now, I know during our COVID crisis, Sir Keir can't be with us, but what he has done is sent a statement of support. Thank you for inviting me to Zane's Advance for Truth and Remembrance event on what would have been Zane's 14th birthday. It is a great tragedy that he is not with us today, and I would like to send my best wishes to all who knew and loved him. As a parent, I can only imagine the pain of losing a child and then having to find the strength to campaign for justice. We are all in awe of Kai and Nicole's perseverance and resolve. It has been an honour to meet with them over the years, and I am always left inspired and moved by their dedication. But it is not right that they are still having to fight for justice. We all want the truth about what happened to Zane. The government needs to grant an independent panel inquiry that gives the family the answers they deserve and confidence in the system. So I thank Sir Keir Starmer for that statement. Our next speaker is Mr. Andy Burnham, perhaps the nation's favourite mayor, an active supporter who we have known since the Hillsborough Independent Panel Inquiry. And he was the first senior politician to give Nicole and I hope from his shadow Home Secretary role, that he, working alongside Sir Keir Starmer, will journey with us to truth for Zane. Now, Andy might not make it in, or he might be here a bit later. He's been called away to a meeting, and I'm sure you've all noticed that Andy Burnham's on TV rather a lot lately, because there's a lot happening for the population of Manchester right now. So it's quite understandable that on this occasion, he sent his profuse apologies, but reminds us of his ongoing and continuous commitment to Zane and truth about Zane. If Andy Burnham arrives a bit later, we will be sure to make sure that we get Andy to share his voice. Our next speaker is Professor Phil Scraton, lead researcher at the Hillsborough Family's Independent Panel Inquiry. And before that, he wrote the book, Hillsborough, The Truth, that exposed what really happened and how families were denied truth and justice. Welcome, Professor Phil Scraton.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor to be able to participate in this panel and to bring shed whatever light I can. You're remarkable people, and I just wish, obviously, that we'd never met and that Zane was still with us. In 1991, after the longest inquests in legal history, the verdict on the deaths of those who died at Hillsborough was accidental death. Those inquests were serviced by the West Midlands Police. They also conducted the criminal investigation. They serviced the Taylor inquiry, and they controlled every aspect of the inquest. I will never forget that day in Sheffield as families left the inquest distraught in exactly the same way that I've seen both Kai and Nicole distraught. They'd heard allegations of drunkenness, ticketlessness, forced entry leveled against their loved ones. I never thought we would reverse that situation. But 20 years later, Andy Burnham, then Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, committed his government to full disclosure of all information held by public bodies, quote, so that families and others can make their judgment on all the facts. A meeting between the families and the Home Secretary followed, and I drafted a document, Hillsborough, Truth, Recovery and Acknowledgement. It demanded full disclosure by all bodies that were involved, including the causes and circumstances of the deaths, the immediate aftermath at the stadium, the temporary mortuary, the medico-legal centre, hospitals, the relationship between official investigations and inquiries, including the central role played by police investigators, how each of the investigations were serviced by the same investigators. It re-examined or proposed re-examining the coroner's investigation and inquiry. It also was concerned to trace and understand the judicial scrutiny of evidence that had followed Hillsborough and had failed to bring truth to the families. Full disclosure, I argued, meant that we should receive all the minutes, briefings, and contemporaneous records, unredacted, in full, that were relevant to all subsequent investigations and inquiries. And I want to quote from that document. Disclosure, we argued, was not just about the families. That was our primary concern, but that it would be in the public interest to increase public awareness and understanding of the circumstances and immediate aftermath of the disaster. Our submission argued that the principle of the family's right to truth, alongside the right to remedy, met the public interest expectations and obligations that we have within a democratic society. The panel appointed had the necessary expertise to cover the full range of issues relevant to the context, circumstances, and aftermath of the disaster. The central element, however, was the research of the many documents, nearly 20,000, that we received from 80 agencies and individuals. 2 years on, having headed the research with my research team, we presented our report with 153 findings that comprehensively reversed all the investigations, inquiries, and the inquests that had gone before. The accidental death verdicts were expunged and new inquests were ordered. 3 years later, the jury verdict at those inquests was that all who died had been unlawfully killed. They also added 25 riders, apportioning failure in the processes and performance of all agencies involved. They also exonerated the fans of any responsibility. Why am I recounting this? I'm recounting this because although 96 people died at Hillsborough in what was the largest single tragedy in our contemporary history, and as you've said already, Kai, Zane is but one person. I make no distinction. I make no distinction between the death of one and the death of 96. While the death of Zane is just one, the complexity of the issues and the responsibilities, like Hillsborough, involve multiple agencies. So, what do I propose? I propose that an expert panel, supported by researchers, independent of state agencies, is appointed to review the longer-term context in which that site was developed, the building of those houses, the immediate events that surrounded Zane's death, and the aftermath of the tragedy, including how the family have been treated since, including especially the inquests. The panel wouldn't take oral evidence. We don't need to take oral evidence, but would research all the documents disclosed. All those documents disclosed, unredacted, in full. All of those documents that would have been written or exchanged at the time by all agencies, including memoranda, including every record of every phone call that was made by all of the agencies concerned. Such transparency will provide the family and wider public interest with a full examination of the facts. It will establish corporate responsibility as appropriate and lay the foundations for further legal actions and possibly and hopefully a second and more appropriate inquest. On what do I base this? I base it on the core principles that we live within a democratic society. The right to know, which means a full examination of all of the facts. Equality of arms. The first inquest at Hillsborough, the families had to raise funds on the street with collection boxes to raise the money for legal representation. 43 families raised that money and had that legal representation. They had one barrister against a barrage of barristers representing all of the other interests. The second inquests were fully legally aided. The families now had multiple barristers representing their interests against those other interests in the court. There has to be equality of arms. In other words, Kai and Nicole should not have to go to their pockets to try and find more funding, to try and raise money in the public domain in order to fight this case. An independent panel inquiry would be fully funded, and that independent panel inquiry would be the beginning of the equality of arms that is necessary for families to actually be represented on an equal footing against corporate interests. Why? Well, obviously, because Kai and Nicole deserve justice for Zane. But that is only part of the story. However central it is only part of the story. It is because this panel and all that followed on from it is in the public interest. There should be no alternative in our society, which is a democratic society, to establishing a single case as being in the public interest, because we know that that could have been another child. Tomorrow, it might be another child. So the public interest is the right to know the full extent of the risk that the authorities were prepared to run in putting those houses where they did and expecting families to live in them under a known and established risk. Finally, I just want to emphasize that none of this can occur appropriately unless the funding is there. In Liverpool, we have a phrase, which many of you know, which is to put your money where your mouth is. If this government actually believes in justice, justice for Kai, justice for Nicole, and especially justice for Zane, then it has to fund it appropriately and fully. And only then can we get to the written facts that underpin the case. And an independent panel, not tarnished by any association with government, is central to that end. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. It's been a privilege.
Thank you very much, Professor Phil Scraton. Very much appreciated. And now, a man that turned concern to action, Richard Bergen, MP. He urged the government to do the right thing and give Zane an independent panel inquiry, whilst laying an essential alternative path to truth, resulting in Zane being in the Labour Party manifesto. Welcome, Richard Bergen, MP.
Thank you very much. And I'm pleased to be able to be with you at this important gathering, which celebrates Zane's life, but also reaffirms all our commitment to do whatever we can to get truth and justice for Zane and for Zane's family. Because today we do remember Zane as he's remembered every day. Zane would have been 14 years old today, a young man making plans about the rest of his life. Nothing, as we've heard, can bring Zane back. But what we can do is to commit to commemorating him in the most fitting way possible by ensuring that justice is done and that the truth, and by that I mean the full truth, is known. Zane's parents, Nicole and Kai, have launched what's the most impressive campaign to get the truth and to get justice. More than 110,000 people have backed the public petition. MPs from across all parties have backed it, including by signing parliamentary motions. There's strong trade union support from the FBU and from others. And now their local council is adding their name to the call. So the government must listen to these calls. It must do so now. Justice should not be a privilege. Justice should be a right. But too often in this country, securing justice has been far too difficult and has taken far too long. We've too many examples from history. Stephen Lawrence, Bloody Sunday, the Hillsborough families. All examples of when, to our shame, the state acted at times as a barrier to truth and justice. So my main message today is that the government shouldn't let this case drag on any longer. Justice will be done, and all of us here today will ensure that. The question for the government is simple: whether it will stand in the way or whether it will help secure justice. The government should put itself on the right side of history. All the government needs to do, as we've heard, is to grant an independent panel inquiry into Zane's death. I'm pleased that the commitments I made at Labour Party conference last year in support of that call are being taken up by my party's new leader and by my party's new Shadow Justice Secretary. I'm delighted by the growing support for this campaign. And Nicole and Kai, I remain committed to doing whatever I can to continue supporting you in your battle. Thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you very much. And that is Andy Burnham. That is Richard Bergen, MP. Thank you very much, Richard. I would now like to introduce Baroness Natalie Bennett, former leader of the Green Party. Natalie has written articles, blogs, tweets, calling for change and exposing the fundamental abuses in Zane's case. Her party has a national motion calling for justice and for an independent panel inquiry. We hope the Lords and the Baronesses are watching to push and advance Zane's call for truth. Welcome, Natalie Bennett.
Thank you very much, Kai. And I'm with you again on another sad anniversary. And I so wish that I'd never have had to been here at all, and that certainly I wouldn't have to be repeating the call for justice. But this afternoon, I was actually at an all-party parliamentary group meeting, a joint one between the Africa all-party parliamentary group and the Human Rights all-party parliamentary group. And I was thinking about Zane at that meeting and thinking about what some of his own words that you were reading out earlier, Kai, about tidying a bigger garden. And we were hearing at that meeting this afternoon about pollution, about deaths, about destruction from industrial processes happening in many different parts of the world, in Liberia, in Ecuador. And we do tend to think that these kind of tragedies, these kind of disasters are something that happens away somewhere else. We know that we live on a poisoned planet, that we've created through our industrial processes and our practices huge numbers of poisons. But Zane's case, the tragedy of Zane's death, reminds us that no one is immune. And as of course we were hearing from the BBC report at the start of this commemoration, climate change means that some of the risks have got bigger and bigger. And so I think that we really have to say, let's start at home. Let's have, as Professor Scraton called for, a proper inquiry here that exposes the historic events. The creation of the toxic environment is something that happened in the past. We can't reverse that now. We can ask some very serious questions about how we can stop it happening in future, but we can also, and we have to, ask how many other people right on this day at this moment. We've had big storms this autumn already, more storms are on the way. How many more people are at risk? And I was reflecting as Professor Scraton was talking in terms about the whole phrase of equality of arms. And it's, it's a slightly unfortunate military phrase, really, but it's one that I've heard again and again. I'm involved with the Legal Aid all-party parliamentary group as well, and as a Green Party person, I'm very often used to what it's like when you go into court hearings without that equality of arms. We've just seen a great many stories about the Sheffield tree campaign. We've just had a report saying basically the tree campaigners were right and the council was absolutely wrong. But I sat in court hearings where the campaigners had one pro bono barrister, very young, very inexperienced, up against a very highly paid council QC. And sometimes we were lucky enough to win. But that was, we were talking about people's liberty. I know I was talking to Kai and Nicole as they approached the inquest in that week or so before, and there was the hope that the legal aid might arrive, there might be some more help, there might be some more possibility of assistance, and it didn't. And so I know what that's like. So what we're talking about here is justice for one wonderful child, truth for that child, truth for his family. But we're also talking about what kind of society we have, what kind of world we have. So as Kai said, the Green Party, this is something we've taken to national conference. We've done everything we can, and I can promise you we will continue to do everything that we possibly can to support you. I really hope that someday, very, very soon, perhaps we can have a meeting like this where we're simply able to celebrate progress, to celebrate truth, to celebrate a way in which these tragic events have helped to change the world. And I can only join so many others in paying tribute to Kai and Nicole, who have worked so hard under such tremendously difficult circumstances. And I think we also have to say thank you very much to the FPU and the other unions who've been very strong supporters, been very active in this, and many people from many sides of politics who've been involved. But ultimately, it has been down to Kai and Nicole, who've done so much, and it's up to the rest of us to support them. So thank you very much. I don't think anyone's noted. We've had about 220 people with us all evening this evening. I think that's a real tribute and a sign of how much strength there is supporting this campaign. So best of luck, and let's all keep fighting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Baroness Natalie Bennett. That's so much appreciated. We are very fortunate to have David Lammy MP, Shadow Justice Secretary and radio presenter, to hear the pain and the sadness at the needless loss of Zane's innocent young life, to hear about the abuses of authorities and the justice system, and the call for the disinfectant of light to call out the secrecy and end the vacuum that allows it to strip a child of their human rights in so awful and obvious a death. Welcome, David Lammy.
Well, look, thank you very much. And you've heard from so many tonight across the political family urging an investigation, an inquiry, the ability to get to the truth. I send my love and condolences as we recall Zane's 14th birthday, what would have been Zane's 14th birthday. But above all, what you've heard from everyone who's spoken is the desire for truth, to walk with you and to gain justice. And we know that sometimes justice can feel a long time coming. We know that particularly where there are powerful forces, justice can be obscured. And we know that the mechanism by which we get to that is a proper panel inquiry. And so I'm very proud to follow in the steps of Richard, Keir, and to be absolutely clear that there is a firm commitment from my party to that inquiry. We will urge the government, and I wrote to the government formally to ask for that inquiry, and we will wait and see what their response is. But I want to make absolutely clear that one day there will be a change of government, just as there has been in other points in our history. I hope that that is sooner rather than later. And when that day comes, were it the case that the government does not heed our call, the call of Spelthorne Council and others, then we will have that inquiry. I think of so many families who have struggled for justice, and it's been elusive. I think of the Hillsborough families, of course. I'm thinking at the moment of the Grenfell families, to whom I'm close. And I hope, I really pray and hope that Kai and Nicole, you don't have to wait as long as some of those others have. Something went wrong in that inquest. And it is a travesty, frankly. It is a travesty that it was not determined that you were entitled to legal aid. It is a travesty that you were up against it when powerful forces were represented. And so it is, of course, right that powerful forces gather around you and continue to gather around you to demand justice, because we can see what's happening here. We can see what could be happening here. And we can see that what we've heard in relation to carbon monoxide and in relation to cyanide, something is desperately wrong here. I've got a quote here, and it is from the great Martin Luther King on the evening before he died. It's his last address. And Martin Luther King said, "I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountains, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And so I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." And I use those words to say that we are with you tonight. Don't be worried about anything. Don't fear anyone. We walk alongside you, and we will see the glory, and we will get justice for Zane. Thank you very much.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. And that was David Lammy MP, and we very much appreciate having written to the government, and we keep active on it. And as always, all the things that us and anybody can do to urge the government to ensure Zane has an independent panel inquiry at the top of what I had to say, the top of this webinar. The call for action is for Zane to have an independent panel inquiry. So now, may I introduce an important person in Zane's life. Mr. Hudson, Zane's head teacher, a very excellent head teacher at that. The day before Zane died, he told Nicole and I that he had asked Mr. Hudson if he and the others could wear their studs for football because it was very muddy. And Mr. Hudson had said, yes. Zane was so happy. Zane loved school. He loved his teachers, especially Mr. Hudson. So I'm very pleased that Mr. Hudson can be with us tonight. Welcome, Mr. Hudson.
Thank you very much, Kai, and thanks, Nicole. And how moving it is just to hear all about Zane. And I suppose I'm very conscious this evening that whereas everybody else, certainly on the panel and many attending, have only met you, Kai and Nicole, kind of since those tragic events of February 2014. But of course, I knew you very well in the olden days, before any of this happened. And I've just been reflecting during the last hour or so, just on some of those images, Kai, when you were fully mobile. I remember you driving up to the forecourt to come and see me. I think was he with Nicole as well, and Zane was there, always with his shock of curls. He was wearing quite a trendy hat, like a trilby hat, and I thought, wow, who's this young man? And full of life, full of love, full of everything to live for. And who would have known? It's the ultimate irony that, of course, we are where we are. So so many memories, and a huge privilege to be able to bring, in a way, Zane's voice and his life and his energy back into the room now. And it is extraordinary to think that he would be celebrating his 14th birthday. I'd actually never realised when his birthday was. I think we've been so focused on the events of February, but it's by a sort of happy coincidence. My dear mother, she'd been 93 today. She died many years ago, but it was her birthday today as well. So as Kai and Nicole know, I love making all these links, and very much believe in this sense of the sort of the community of saints. And there's no doubt that little Zane was one of the most saintly little young people I've ever met, with a maturity beyond his years. Amazing to think that, of course, if none of this had happened, he'd be on the onset of adolescence. So that would have been quite something, wouldn't it? And of course, he would have brought so much to his peers. But of course, that hasn't happened, and we know why, because of those terrible events of February 2014. And I remember at the time putting a tribute together in which I described him then as a larger-than-life character. He was in year 2. He was probably one of the best-known children in Key Stage 1, so from years 1 and 2 amongst the older children up the school. Not just because of that lovely sort of shock of curls, which made him visibly stand out, but as we've heard, he was an incredibly forward-looking and passionate member of the Green Committee, the Eco Committee we call it now. I'm just strange how the words and the nomenclature kind of changes so readily, but it was very much in its infancy in those days, 7 years ago. But he was a real eco warrior, a cause that he clearly inherited, of course, from Kai and Nicole. And of course, back then, he really stood out, and some people thought, what is Zane talking about? But the more you listen to him, the more you realize that he had this vision for the future. And of course, one of the great tragedies amongst everything is that not only that he died so young, but that he was actually only with us at the junior school for 1.5 years. It seemed much, much longer. But what a privilege it was that, as it turned out, that it was the final chapter of his life spent in a place that really got him during those last months. And on a very personal note, it was particularly poignant and lovely for me that, as his headmaster, I teach very little, but I teach RE once a week, and it happened to be Zane's class. And yes, as Kai said, he happened to be in my football club as well, so double whammy for Zane. Wonderful for me. And I'm a big softy at heart. I did relent over those football studs, and Zane knew that he got away with it, but I just couldn't resist that incredible smile he had. And he just loved, he wouldn't waste a moment. So we talked about football studs. Okay, he got his way on that, but we would always have chats on the way down to the football field and on the way back. and he was always full of questions in class. And again, it's very poignant that just a few days before he died, it happened to be that bit of the RE course that we were discussing what heaven might be like. And he had so many questions he wanted answered to, including just what do you do there? What happens there? And of course, can you play football there? And of course, he got to know the answers much sooner than the rest of us. But you know, that image of him being so much at ease with adults, and it's one of my kind of mantras really, that I love to say that by the time a child leaves in year 6, I must be able to hear his or her voice in my head. And sometimes I had to wait right up to the wire for the quieter ones. But I certainly didn't have to wait for Zane. I knew him. I knew him in year 1. Didn't have to wait for year 2. He was a charming young man, and not superficially, absolutely full of curiosity and inquisitiveness. And you know, now all these years later, I still think of him and pray for him every morning as I do my early morning rounds at school. As lots of heads try and do, I try and go out and meet and greet everyone. It's not so easy during these COVID times, but one thing, it's like a little pilgrimage every morning. I just make my way down through the staff car park to the Eco Garden, or what since 2017 has been called, again very poignantly, Zane's Garden. It was beautifully kind of and formally opened a few years ago, and there's a beautiful cedarwood plaque engraved with Zane's name there on the wall, and I always just touch it and I pray for him, and I pray for all those who have died since then, because of course, you know, life goes on. And very poignantly, again, it was designed and actually made by a former member of staff at St George's College, Ivor Facey, who sadly himself died in an accident just a couple of years after that. So the fragility of life always springs to mind. And of course, Zane, in his young and tender way, kind of knew that. But the message, of course, was that for those of us who remain, you know, we have an obligation to try and live life to the full, as the least that we can do for those, of course, who left us earlier. And you know, it's very appropriate, and again, it's one of those ironies that, of course, Zane's name will be remembered forever, way beyond the rest of us who have lived many more years. And not only through things like his garden, but we have Zane's Eco Prize, and that's for a member of year 6 who's about to leave the junior school, and who's really epitomised the spirit of Zane's love and concern for the environment. And as you can imagine, that it's one of the most treasured prizes to even be considered for, and was presented by Kai and Nicole for the first time in July 2018 at what would, of course, have been Zane's last day at the junior school had he lived to see it. And now words like sustainability are, of course, common currency everywhere, not just at school. But, you know, they were on Zane's lips years ahead of his peers. And all the recycling that we do, including the bit of paper that I was using when we met in February, many of us, and I'm reading this off, you know, is a sign and witness to Zane's legacy. He knew those wonderful words that St. Mother Teresa of Calcutta so eloquently put it, the quote, we can do no thing, only small thing great love. And he would have liked that. He wouldn't have wanted to do any of this without love. He would have said, well, what's the point? You've got to mean it, and you've got to love it, and you've got to do it because you love others. So yeah, out of the mouths of children and babes, you know, Zane taught us so much in his brief life and his time with us at St George's Junior School. And then suddenly he was gone, but definitely never, ever forgotten. And indeed, the mark he made on the school community will be immortalised way beyond, as I said, the lifetimes of the rest of us, and very deservedly so. You know, and I still see his peers. It's amazing that they're in year 9 now, very grown up. But his presence is always there. And of course, you know, his peers will have, in a way, the shadow of his untimely death forever etched on their lives. But it's an opportunity, and has been an opportunity for them to grow, just to appreciate the things that they can have and which Zane could never have. And again, that's huge testimony. You know, it's another gift that he's left behind. And all I can say really in summary is that it was a real privilege to know such an impressive young man who certainly lived up to my headmaster's motto. It sounds rather grandiose, but it's just a custom at the school that each head has a motto, and it's simply learning to live and love to the full. And it's been a huge privilege, and I've heard from the other speakers tonight, of course, to walk absolutely alongside Kai and Nicole, not just in all those days, those dark days back in 2014, but to keep in touch and just to be there absolutely for them. You know, Zane was a real prize winner in every sense of the word. We know that we can't have him back in person, but he is absolutely with us in spirit. And the very least that we can do today is, of course, to get to the bottom of what really happened on that dark, dark day in February 2014, and to find the pearl of great price, which is the truth. So thank you very much, Kai and Nicole, for inviting me again this evening, and very, very moving, and a real privilege to be here, as it were, in the room, albeit remotely, with the rest of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hudson, and it's a great privilege for us to have you and our speakers here. Now, as we draw towards the end, and as we advance for truth for Zane, there are lots of ways that you can help. Before I go on to those, some people may have noticed the complement of people that are on the panel, and I can say that there will be people from all the political parties that are with us at this time as part of the audience. However, it is a matter in terms of Conservative members being invited, it is a matter of choice for them as to whether they can be here with us, and that's a fair option, just as it is any one of us that are present to make that choice. So as we advance towards truth, there are lots of ways that you can help to get Zane's voice heard. As you can see in a closing slide that we are putting up, and also perhaps in the text box, it's possible to pre-order a book due out early next year. And the first 2,000 people to pre-order that book will receive a special limited edition hard copy of the book with their name in it. Or donate to Zane's GoFundMe to help fund the book's publication. And please do sign Zane's petition and share, and/or contact us if you feel in any way compelled to share what you know with us. All of this can be done at www.truthaboutzane.com. But most of all, please share what happened with all of the people that you know. Brave, loyal and true. We thank our host, the Fire Brigade Union, and all of our speakers this evening. And we thank you for registering and coming, all of the audience registering and coming and showing your support for Zane. And I can tell you that Nicole and I and Zane very much appreciate it. And Zane would certainly want us to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all the support that you've provided. It is the case, as Richard Bergen stated, that there are 110,000 people that have signed Zane's petition calling for an independent panel inquiry. The unions, the Fire Brigade Union, the Communication Workers Union, the National Education Union, Unison, Unite, the TUC, PCS, and all of their national motions of support, we thank you. The political parties also with national motions of support, the Green Party and the Labour Party who placed Zane in their manifesto. And we also thank Parliament through the offices of Jess Phillips MP and Richard Bergen MP for the hard-hitting work that was done in the early day motion, evidencing excellent support for Zane to have an independent panel inquiry. Together, we have had to embody the truth to overcome the wealth of lies from those who should have kept us safe. Justice for all, and do stay in touch. Goodbye and God bless.
What's wrong with the world, mama? People living like they ain't got no mama. I think the whole world's addicted to the drama, only attracted to things that'll bring the trauma. Overseas, yeah, we trying to stop terrorism, but we still got terrorists here living in the USA, the big CIA, the Bloods and the Crips and the KKK. But if you only have love for your own race, then you only leave space to discriminate, and to discriminate only generates hate. And when you hate, then you're bound to get irate. Yeah, madness is what you demonstrate, and that's exactly how anger works and operates. Man, you gotta have love just to set it straight. Take control of your mind and meditate. Let your soul gravitate to the love, y'all.
People killing, people dying, children hurt and you hear them crying. When you practice what you preach and what you turn the other cheek. Father, 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 help us and some guidance from above. These people got me questioning. Where is the love? Where is the love? Where is the love? Where is the love?
It just ain't the same, always will change. New days are strange, is the world insane? If love and peace is so strong, why are the pieces of love that don't belong? Nations dropping bombs, chemical gases filling lungs of little ones with ongoing suffering as the youth are young. So ask yourself, is the loving really gone? So I could ask myself, really what is going wrong in this world that we living in? People keep on giving in, making wrong decisions, only visions of them dividends, not respecting each other, denying thy brother. A war's going on, but the reason's undercover. The truth is kept secret, it's swept under the rug. If you never know, what's the truth, y'all? Come on, I don't know. What's the love, y'all?
People killing, people dying, children hurt and you hear them crying. When you practice what you preach and what you turn the other cheek. Father, 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 help us and some guidance from above. These people got me questioning. Where is the love? Where is the love? Where is the love? Where is the love?
Feel the weight of the world on my shoulder. As I'm getting older, your people get colder. Most of us only care about money making. Selfishness got us following the wrong direction. Wrong information always shown by the media. Negative images is the main criteria. Infecting the young minds faster than bacteria. Just wanna act like what they see in the cinema. Whatever happened to the values of humanity? Whatever happened to the fairness and equality? Instead of spreading love, we're spreading animosity. Lack of understanding leading us away from unity. That's the reason why sometimes I'm feeling under. That's the reason why sometimes I'm feeling down. There's no wonder why sometimes I'm feeling under. Gotta keep my faith alive as love is found. Ask yourself,
where is the love? Where is the love? Where is the love? Father, 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 help us and some guidance from above. These people got me questioning. Where is the love?
sing with me, y'all. One word. We only got one word. That's all we got. One word. There's something wrong with it. Something's wrong with it. Something's wrong with the world. Yeah, we only got one word. That's all we got. One word.